Picture a man standing on the deck of a ship he has just bought. It is the most beautiful ship in the harbor. Polished mahogany, gold trim, sails white as bone. He paid for it with 10 years of 18-hour days. And as he stands there, watching the sunset hit the water, he waits to feel it. The thing he was promised. The arrival, the peace. It doesn't come. Instead, in the quiet, a single thought rises up from somewhere he can't silence. Now what? This is not a story about a man who failed. This is a story about a man who succeeded at everything he was told mattered and found out, standing on his own deck in the middle of his own triumph, that none of it was ever going to be enough, because he had spent his whole life chasing the wrong thing. 2,000 years ago, a Stoic philosopher warned us this exact moment was coming. He told us exactly why the ship, the money, the applause, the promotion, the approval, none of it would ever fill the space we think it will fill. And he told us, in painfully simple terms, what actually would. Stay until the end, because by the time this video is over, you will understand the difference between the things that feel like happiness and the one thing that actually is happiness, and you will never chase the wrong one again. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the place where ancient philosophy meets modern life. Every week we take the timeless teachings of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus and Seneca, and we translate them into tools you can actually use to build a calmer mind, a stronger will, and a life that finally feels like yours. If you're new here, consider subscribing, because what you're about to hear will change how you measure your own life. Somewhere right now, someone is telling themselves a story. The story goes like this: I am not happy yet, but I will be once I get the job, once I get the relationship, once I lose the weight, buy the house, hit the number in my bank account, get the recognition I deserve. It is the most common story in the world, and it is, according to the Stoics, one of the most dangerous lies a human mind can tell itself. Not because ambition is bad, not because goals are worthless, but because this story quietly assumes something false. That happiness is a destination, sitting somewhere out ahead of you, guarded by achievement, and that once you cross that finish line, the guard will finally step aside and let you in. The Stoics discovered through war, exile, slavery, imperial power, plague, and loss that this finish line does not exist. There is no amount of external success that produces internal peace. You can win everything the world has to offer and still lie awake at 2 a.m. feeling like a stranger in your own life. And you can lose almost everything the world has to offer and still feel, for the first time, genuinely free. This isn't poetic exaggeration. This is a documented pattern across nearly every Stoic biography we have. Seneca lived it as one of the wealthiest men in Rome. Epictetus lived it as a man born into slavery who became one of history's most influential teachers of freedom. Marcus Aurelius lived it as the single most powerful man on earth, ruler of an empire, and he still wrote himself private reminders at night about how to endure his own life. 3 completely different positions in the social hierarchy: a type billionaire equivalent, a slave, and an emperor. And all 3 arrived at the exact same conclusion. Today, we're going to walk through what that conclusion is, why the human brain is wired to resist it, and, more importantly, how you actually apply it starting tonight, in your actual life with your actual problems. Let me ask you something before we go further. Somewhere in your life right now, is there a "once I get X, I'll finally be happy" running quietly in the background? Type it in the comments below. Don't overthink it, just name it. Because by the end of this video, I want you to look at that sentence again and see it completely differently. The hedonic trap. Why the finish line keeps moving. Let's go back to the man on the ship, because his name, for the sake of this story, is James. James grew up in a small apartment above a laundromat. His mother worked 2 jobs. He remembers vividly the specific feeling of being 12 years old and watching other kids get picked up from school in nice cars, while he waited for a bus that was always 15 minutes late. He decided, somewhere around that age, that money was the answer. Not because he was shallow, because he was in pain, and money looked like the thing standing between him and that pain ending. So James built a life around acquisition. Every year had a number attached to it. Every promotion was a mountain he needed to summit before he could rest. And for a long time, this worked, in the sense that it kept him moving, kept him achieving, kept him distracted from the ache underneath it. Here's the part nobody warns you about. Each time James hit a goal, the relief lasted about 2 weeks, sometimes less. He would close a deal that once would have felt like winning the lottery, and by the following Tuesday, it would already feel like baseline, like nothing. Not because the achievement wasn't real, because his mind had already recalibrated to a new normal and was already scanning the horizon for the next thing to chase. Psychologists have a name for this now, the hedonic treadmill. But the Stoics understood the mechanism 2,000 years before anyone had a laboratory to study it. Seneca wrote about wealthy Romans who owned more than they could ever spend in 10 lifetimes, and yet lived in constant anxiety, constantly comparing themselves not to the poor, but to the slightly richer man next door. He observed that desire doesn't get satisfied by acquisition, it gets multiplied by it. The more you get, the more your mind expands the definition of enough. This is the trap. Not that ambition is evil, but that when your peace of mind is tied to an external outcome, you have unknowingly handed the keys to your own happiness over to something you don't fully control: the market, other people's opinions, timing, luck, circumstance, and a mind that is only at peace when circumstances cooperate is a mind that is never actually at peace. It is simply waiting. James stood on that ship and felt the full weight of this. He had done everything right, by the standard definition of right, and he was still, in the most important sense, exactly where he started, still waiting for permission to feel okay. If any part of this feels uncomfortably familiar, you are not alone and you are not broken. You were simply taught the wrong map. And the good news, the actual good news, the reason this philosophy has survived 2,000 years is that there is a different map. Let's look at it. The dichotomy of control, the map that actually works. Epictetus began nearly everything he taught with a single distinction, so foundational that everything else in Stoic philosophy is essentially a variation on this one idea. He said, some things are up to us and some things are not. Up to us, our judgments, our intentions, our desires, our aversions, our reactions, our choices, our effort, our character. In short, the movements of our own mind and will. Not up to us, our body, our reputation, other people's opinions of us, our possessions, the outcomes of our actions, the actions of other people, the past, the timing of events, whether we get sick, whether the market crashes, whether someone loves us back. This sounds simple. It is not simple to live, because almost everything our culture teaches us to chase: status, money, relationships, recognition, outcomes, lives entirely in the second category. We have been trained from childhood to build our identity and our sense of worth on a foundation of things that are, by their very nature, outside our control. Think about what that actually means. If your happiness depends on your reputation, you have made your happiness dependent on other people's opinions, which can change based on a rumor, a bad day, a misunderstanding you'll never even hear about. If your happiness depends on a relationship, you have made your happiness dependent on another human being's choices, moods, and circumstances, none of which you can command. If your happiness depends on winning, you have made your happiness dependent on beating someone else, which means your peace requires someone else's defeat, forever, with no end in sight. Epictetus wasn't telling his students to stop caring about outcomes. He was telling them to stop anchoring their inner state to outcomes. Let's bring in a second character here, a woman named Elena, a court physician's daughter who lived generations after these teachings first spread, but who represents something the Stoics saw over and over in their own students. Elena had spent years preparing for a single medical exam, the culmination of everything she'd worked toward. She studied obsessively. She told herself over and over, "Once I pass this exam, everything will finally be okay." She failed. Not by a small margin, by a devastating one. On a technicality involving a form she'd filled out incorrectly under pressure. And for months afterward, she described the sensation as her identity collapsing, because she had built her entire sense of self on an outcome that had never actually been hers to control. She had controlled her studying. She had controlled her effort, her discipline, her preparation. But the outcome, the actual pass or fail, depended on factors far beyond her. An examiner's mood, a bureaucratic error, pure chance. This is the exact distinction Epictetus drew a lifetime before her. You control the arrow's aim. You do not control the wind. Here's where it gets genuinely powerful. Though, and this is the part I want you to sit with, because it's the hinge the entire philosophy turns on. Epictetus didn't say stop trying. He said try with everything you have, and place your sense of self entirely in the trying, not in what the wind does to your arrow afterward. Elena eventually retook that exam, but something had changed in her by then. She had done the internal work. She trained herself deliberately day by day to evaluate her worth by her preparation and effort, not by the result. And when she sat for the exam a second time, something remarkable happened. She performed better, not because she cared less, but because she had removed the paralyzing terror of an outcome she couldn't control and replaced it with total presence in the part she could. This is not a coincidence, and it's not mysticism. When your nervous system isn't in a state of existential threat over an outcome you can't dictate, you actually perform the controllable parts better. Anxiety about the uncontrollable steals resources from your execution of the controllable. The Stoics understood this intuitively. Modern performance psychology has simply caught up and confirmed it. I want you to try something with me right now, wherever you're watching this. Think of one thing currently causing you stress. Now ask yourself honestly, which part of this is actually up to me, and which part isn't? Write the two lists out, even mentally. You'll likely notice the list of things not up to you is longer than you thought. And that alone can feel like a physical exhale. Drop a comment telling me what came up when you did that. I read every single one, and I promise you, whatever you wrote, someone else watching this needs to read it too. The illusion of external goods. Let's talk about Marco, a man who for years believed that respect was something other people handed to you, like a trophy once you'd proven yourself sufficiently. Marco ran a small business. He worked harder than almost anyone he knew, and yet he felt constantly like he was one bad quarter away from losing everyone's respect. His employees, his family's, his own. Marco's error was one the Stoics named explicitly. He had confused what they called external goods with the good itself. Wealth, health, reputation, pleasure, comfort. The Stoics called these indifferents, not because they don't matter at all, but because they are indifferent to your moral character and your inner state. You can have all of them and be miserable. You can have none of them and be at peace. They are, in the Stoic framework, preferred when available. Nobody was telling Marco to want to be poor, but they are never the foundation of a good life, because a foundation has to be something that cannot be taken from you, and everything external can be taken from you. Your health can fail overnight. Your wealth can vanish in a market crash, a lawsuit, a bad decision by someone else entirely. Your reputation can be destroyed by a lie you never got the chance to correct. If any of these is the foundation of your happiness, you are building your entire house on a floor that could give way at any moment. And some part of you knows it, which is precisely why so many successful, wealthy, admired people report a constant, low hum of anxiety even while everything looks fine from the outside. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man alive at the time, wrote to himself, not for an audience, not for publication, but in a private journal never meant to be read by anyone, reminders that sound almost like someone trying to talk themselves down from a ledge. He reminded himself constantly that the emperor's purple robe was just dyed wool, that the palace was just stone and wood, that the crowds cheering for him today could just as easily turn on him tomorrow, and had turned on emperors before him violently. Why would the most powerful man in the world need to remind himself of this, over and over in the privacy of his own notebook? Because he understood something that Marco eventually came to understand too. Proximity to enormous external goods does not immunize you against the psychological trap of depending on them. If anything, it makes the trap more seductive, because the goods are so abundant, so immediate, so seemingly permanent, that it becomes almost impossible to remember they are not actually yours to keep. Marco's turning point came, ironically, during a crisis, a period where his business nearly collapsed due to circumstances entirely outside his control, and in the middle of that collapse, stripped of the numbers that had defined his self-worth for years, he discovered something that terrified him and then, slowly, freed him. He was still there. His character, his integrity, the way he treated people, his discipline, his effort, none of that had evaporated along with the revenue. The business had been an external good. He had survived its loss completely intact as a person. This is the exact discovery the Stoics wanted every student to make. Ideally before the crisis, not during it. That is the entire purpose of practices like negative visualization, or what they called premeditatio malorum, deliberately imagining the loss of what you have, not to be morbid, but to sever your identity from things you don't actually control, before life severs it for you without your consent. If you're finding value in this so far, this would be a great moment to hit that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who need to hear it, and it costs you nothing but a second. Memento mori, the strange gift of your own mortality. There is a phrase the Stoics return to again and again, one that sounds bleak on the surface but is, once you understand it, one of the most life-giving ideas in the entire philosophy. Memento mori. Remember that you will die. This is not meant to depress you. It's meant to do the opposite, to snap you out of the trance that makes you treat your finite, irreplaceable days as an infinite resource you can spend carelessly on things that don't matter, chasing goals that, even if achieved, will not deliver the peace you're expecting. Marcus Aurelius wrote about how quickly even the most famous men of history are forgotten, how the emperors before him, whose names had once filled the mouths of millions, were already fading into obscurity in his own lifetime. He wasn't writing this to despair. He was writing it to loosen his own grip on legacy, on reputation, on the desperate need to be remembered, because he understood that grip was quietly poisoning his present. Here's the practical version of this. Ask yourself, if you knew with certainty that you had 1 year left, would you still be spending your energy chasing the things you're currently chasing? For some things, the answer will still be yes. And that's valuable information, because it tells you those things are actually aligned with your values, not just habits of comparison and fear. But for other things, that promotion you don't actually want, that image you're maintaining for people whose opinions won't matter to you, on your deathbed, that resentment you're still carrying from an argument 3 years ago, the answer will be a very clear no. And that no is a gift. It's a compass. Seneca wrote one of the most piercing lines in all of Stoic literature on this subject. The observation that it is not that we have a short life, but that we waste a great deal of it. Most people, he said, don't run out of time. They spend their allotted time on things so far removed from what actually matters that when death finally arrives, they realize with horror that they never really lived at all. They were simply preparing to live, forever postponing the actual moment of living until some future condition was met. This is the same trap James fell into on that ship. He was always about to start living once the next milestone arrived. Memento mori is the antidote, because it collapses the someday into now. It asks you, uncomfortably but usefully, what are you actually waiting for? I want to pause here and ask you directly, not rhetorically, but really ask you, what is one thing you have been postponing until some future version of enough? A conversation, a trip, forgiving someone, Starting the thing you're scared to start. Type it below, sometimes just naming it out loud, even to strangers in a comment section, is the first crack in the waiting. Amor fati, loving what happens. If the dichotomy of control tells you what to release, and Memento mori tells you why urgency matters, there's a third piece that ties it together, a concept the Stoics called amor fati, love of fate. Not merely accepting what happens to you, but actively choosing to love it, to treat it as necessary material for your own growth rather than an obstacle standing between you and the life you were supposed to have. This is, without question, the hardest part of the philosophy to actually live, because it asks you to extend this principle even to suffering. Not to pretend suffering feels good. The Stoics were not masochists, and they never claimed pain doesn't hurt, but to stop resisting reality as it is, because that resistance is where a huge amount of unnecessary suffering actually lives. Consider Eleanor again after her failed exam. There were two available responses to that failure. One, rage against it, treat it as an injustice the universe owed her an apology for, spend months in bitterness wishing it hadn't happened. Two, treat the failure as raw material, information about what needed to change, a forcing function that ultimately made her a better physician than she would have been if she'd passed on the first attempt, coasting on unexamined weaknesses. She didn't choose the failure. She chose what she did with it, and it's that second choice, the choice of interpretation and response, that the Stoics considered the entire arena of human freedom. Epictetus, born into slavery, physically disabled by an injury inflicted by a master, still managed to become one of history's most cited teachers on freedom, precisely because he located freedom somewhere his captors could never reach, in the interior space of judgment and will. He literally could not control his own body's movements at times in his life. And yet he taught with total conviction that no one could actually enslave a mind that refused to be enslaved internally. This is not a suggestion to accept genuine injustice passively, or to never work to change bad circumstances. The Stoics were deeply active in public life, in law, in governance, in reform. Amor fati is not passivity. It is the refusal to let your inner peace be hostage to circumstances, while you do the practical work of engaging with, and where possible improving, those circumstances. You can work to change your situation and simultaneously refuse to let your happiness wait for that change to succeed. Marco, rebuilding his business after its near collapse, described the shift this way. He stopped asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and started asking, "What does this require of me?" The first question is a dead end. It has no answer, and searching for one just deepens the wound. The second question is a door. It always has an answer, because it points back to the one thing that's always up to you, your response. What lasting happiness actually is. So if it isn't the ship, the exam, the reputation, the applause, what is it? The Stoics had a specific word for the state they were actually pursuing, and it's often mistranslated in ways that flatten its meaning. The word is eudaimonia, and while it's frequently rendered as happiness, it's closer to something like human flourishing, or a life well lived in accordance with virtue and reason. This matters because happiness in the modern sense usually implies a feeling, a pleasant emotional state you're either in or out of. Eudaimonia is not primarily a feeling. It's closer to a state of being aligned with your own reason, your own values, your own character, regardless of what emotional weather happens to be passing through on a given day. It is possible in the Stoic framework to be sad and still be flourishing, because flourishing isn't about the absence of difficult emotion. It's about the presence of integrity, virtue, and right action even inside difficult emotion. The Stoics identified 4 cardinal virtues as the actual architecture of this flourishing life. Wisdom, seeing clearly, understanding what is and isn't in your control. Courage, acting rightly even when it's hard or frightening. Justice, treating others with fairness, as fellow participants in a shared human community. And temperance, self-mastery, the discipline to not be ruled by every passing appetite or impulse. Notice something remarkable about this list. Every single one of these is entirely within your control. You can be wise, courageous, just, and disciplined regardless of your bank account, your relationship status, your health, or your reputation. You can practice all four virtues in a palace or in a prison cell, and history gave us Stoic teachers in both settings doing exactly that. This is why the Stoics considered virtue the only true good, not because external things are worthless, but because virtue is the only good that cannot be stolen from you by circumstance, and therefore the only stable foundation on which to build a life. James, our man on the ship, eventually found his way to something like this understanding, not in a single, dramatic epiphany, but slowly, the way most real change actually happens. He kept the business. He didn't burn his life down in some overcorrection into asceticism. What changed was the internal wiring underneath the external life. He stopped asking, "What do I need to acquire to finally feel okay?" and started asking, "Who do I need to become? And how do I act with integrity today?" Regardless of outcome, the ship stayed the same ship. Everything about his relationship to it changed. This is the actual Stoic secret, and it's almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. Lasting happiness was never sitting out ahead of you, behind some achievement you haven't reached yet. It was always available in this exact moment, through the one thing that was always yours, the quality of your judgments, your character, your effort, your response. Everything else, the ship, the exam, the reputation, the money, what was never the destination. It was just weather, sometimes pleasant, sometimes not, always passing through, never something to build a permanent house inside of. A practice for tonight. Philosophy that stays theoretical is decoration, not medicine. So here is something small and specific you can actually do, starting tonight. Before you sleep, take 2 minutes and ask yourself 3 questions, the way Stoic students were trained to do at the end of each day. First, where did I act well today? Where did I show wisdom, courage, justice, or discipline, even in a small way? Second, where did I act poorly? Where did I let my peace depend on something outside, my control, or react from fear or ego instead of reason? Third, what will I do differently tomorrow? Notice what this practice does not ask. It doesn't ask what you achieved today. It doesn't ask what you acquired, what praise you received, what numbers moved in your favor. It asks only about the one territory that was always entirely yours. Do this consistently, and something begins to shift, slowly, quietly, the way real transformation always does. You start to measure your days by a different standard, and once that standard changes, the whole chase changes with it. Let's go back one last time to that ship. James is still standing on the deck. The sun is still setting. Nothing about the external scene has changed, but something in him finally has. He no longer needs this moment to deliver a feeling it was never built to deliver. He can simply stand there, in the actual present, and notice the water, the light, the fact that he is alive to see it, without auditioning the moment for whether it's finally enough. That is the whole secret, not more. Not a bigger ship, a better exam score, a louder round of applause. Just the quiet, radical decision to stop outsourcing your peace to things that were never yours to control, and to start building your life on the one foundation that can never be repossessed. Your own character, your own judgment, your own daily choice to act with wisdom, courage, justice, and discipline, no matter what the weather outside is doing. You don't need the ship. You never did. You just needed to know where to stop looking. If this video gave you even one moment of clarity today, do 3 things for me. Like it, so more people struggling with this exact chase can find it. Subscribe, so we can keep walking through these ideas together, one video at a time. And leave a comment telling me one thing, external or internal, that you're finally ready to stop chasing. I read every single one, and I promise you, someone else scrolling through these comments needs to see that they're not the only one letting go tonight. Until next time, this is Wisdom of the Stoics, reminding you The good life was never out there. It was always right here, waiting for you to stop running past it.